Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of the Humble Choice bundle for November 2022. A month with no particular standout title as its flagship, but there are a bunch of solid games here despite this. Let me know what you think of this month's bundle in the comments below. Be sure to check the timestamps for specific games, and stay tuned for my final thoughts in the end. Okay, let's get to the review. Starting off the month is Morbid, the 7 Acolytes. At a glance, it's a decent-looking top-down 2D pixel art Souls-like. As we get into the gameplay, I begin to wonder if it's something I'd want to play for anything longer than this review. As many Souls-like games tend to go, players are dropped into a cold and unforgiving world with obscure lore and beasties that don't need to try too hard to kill you. Or at least that's how it usually is. One thing I found is that the enemy AI in the game tends to be really stupid. Like being unable to path to the player and getting stuck, or just not being able to react to the player's actions very well. In many combat encounters, I found myself leading with a heavy attack, rolling or even just running back a bit, and then following up with another heavy attack. Rinse and repeat. Even the one boss fight, or mini-boss it might have been, was the same way. However, I want to mention that there is a leveling mechanic in the game, but you only have access to your skill points once you kill the first of the 7 Acolytes, which are the big bosses in the game. I faced my first one, but I found that he seemed like a real hit point sponge, and since I was at my hour with the game, I didn't feel inclined to try and beat him. One other thing I didn't care for was how the map worked. You had to find the map while exploring, which is fine, but it couldn't be accessed unless you were at the equivalent of a bonfire, or a checkpoint for those unfamiliar with Dark Souls. I found that to be rather annoying. I'm not sure about this one. It seems alright at best for me, but I'm really unsure if I'd come back to this, especially when I still need to get through Elden Ring. Following Morbid is Raji, an ancient epic, which is an action-adventure game that is kind of like a side-scroller, but at the same time not really. The really cool thing about the game is its setting, which is based on Hindu lore and set in ancient India, which according to the Steam page is the first of its kind. I have no idea if this claim is true, but it's definitely the first I've seen. The cinematic art style was really distinctive here, and I appreciated the extra level of immersion by providing a Hindi audio language. The game itself was fun in my first hour. While I know the two games aren't that comparable, Raji was a breath of fresh air from Morbid's slow and seemingly lacking combat. Very soon into the game, Raji, the name of the game and its protagonist, gets a spear from Durga, one of the Hindu gods. The game shows players how to use the spear in a tutorial that I think could have been better prompted. I did find some things confusing as to how to pull off certain moves, but soon I was making Raji bob and weaving and spinning up combos on the demons she faces. The combat here is very reactive to the environment, allowing players to set up different attacks based off of what they're interacting with, like wall jumping with an attack or doing an AoE spin around a pole. With a fun combat system and a cool setting, I'm definitely returning to this at some point. And for those who just want to experience the game's narrative and setting, the developers included a story mode difficulty, which I imagine trivializes the combat in favor of the rich Indian culture and story it tells. Next up is a stealth game called Unmetal. It's definitely a parody of Metal Gear Solid with a bunch of other references thrown into the mix, and it's actually really funny. I found myself laughing out loud, which I feel games very rarely do that for me. You play as Jesse Fox, a man imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. He's telling his story to some sort of military personnel. At times the story can change depending on what Jesse decides to embellish. Or maybe it's the truth, who knows. I was also surprised to find that I could make changes sometimes when an option presented itself. Actually, some options made a situation even harder, which I wasn't sure if there was a reason for doing so other than more potential experience points. The gameplay is fairly solid as well. I don't know how close it is to a Metal Gear game as I've never played them, but I like what I experienced here. Players have to use items at their disposal as well as patience to overcome various stealth obstacles. Luckily, there were difficulty options, so anyone who just wants the story and the laughs that come with it can do that. I played this developer's first game, On Epic, which had a similar humor and pop culture references. I liked it, but I think Unmetal was by far and away the better game in writing and in its gameplay. I definitely will be coming back to this one to finish it. Following up is another Souls-like game in the bundle, being Eldest Souls. although I use the term Souls-like very loosely. Eldest Souls is essentially a boss rush mode where you fight difficult bosses one after another. There's no normal enemies to fight or even much of a world to explore, although I did like the pixel art in this one as well. And I think that might be a detriment to the game, but also a positive. As much as I love the rush of endorphins I get when I beat a particularly hard boss, I also like being able to set the boss aside if I want, or decide not to go on to the next hard challenge so soon after. To mention Elden Ring again, I think that's why I found Elden Ring's gameplay to be so appealing to me, because it allowed for those kind of more low-key moments. However, the bosses that I encountered here seem to be well crafted. To be fair, I only really faced the first two for any length of time, and the first one was more of a tutorial. The bosses I encountered all had a variety of movesets, and learning them and the tells they had were fun, as opposed to Morbid, which felt more like adding hit points was their main way to increase difficulty. Although, after the 15th or 20th time trying to face the second boss, I have to say I did feel like putting it down for a while and coming back later. I definitely had fun with it though, but there's only so much defeat I can take. The fact that I needed to do an hour, and that I knew I was so close to beating him, spurred me on to finish the fight. I plan to come back to this one, but I can't imagine my play sessions to be very long. In what seems like a long while, we have a roguelike game in the form of an FPS known as Roboquest. This is another one of those games where I don't expect much and then come up pleasantly surprised. So to set this aside up front, the story here is minimal, and I don't think it adds much to the game other than facilitating travel between the different areas. You play as a robot that is maintained by a girl named Max. There's some mysterious areas she's trying to conduct research on, but there are angry robots that want to kill you and keep you away from whatever secrets lay hidden. And that's about it. I feel most people probably don't play roguelites for their excellent narratives though, but rather for the gameplay. And the gameplay holds up. It's a fast-paced shooter, but it doesn't feel like some of the retro shooters we've had in recent past bundles. I felt combat was responsive and was really mobile. There's a lot of jumping and moving around to dodge projectiles. I felt like a badass when I could grind on the railings for a quicker momentum, to then jump off and rain bullets down on the bad guys. There's a variety of guns to use and upgrade, as well as a persistent base camp to level up in between runs. The stylistic art for the level designs were nice to look at, even if they were a bit too samey. Although, I felt the comic strip cinematics were just okay. Some of the art done for those felt phoned in, almost as if they were really rough concept sketches that never got fully fleshed out. That little nitpick aside, I actually had way more fun with this than I expected to. I imagine I'll return to this one at some point. We travel back in time in the next one to Edo period Japan, with Shadow Tactics, Blade of the Shogun, Aiko's Choice. This game is actually a standalone expansion to the original game. Aiko is one of the protagonists in a group of 5 specialists that report to the Shogun himself in an effort to maintain order and peace throughout the realm. For any who've played Desperados 3 from a few bundles ago, the gameplay here is very similar. It's a tactical stealth game where you control a group of people each with their own varying skills, such as Mugen, a stalwart samurai relying on his twin blades to take down groups of enemies, or Hayato, a deadly assassin that could use his shuriken for near-silent range takedowns. And noise is a huge consideration when deciding how to employ your companions. Every action has the potential to alert the enemy and possibly call more reinforcements, making the objective that much harder, which actually happened to me quite a lot. A note for those just jumping into it, I would probably suggest starting with the base game first. There's a bit of backstory catch-up in the beginning, but you don't really have any sense of the characters from a story point of view, or from a gameplay perspective as well. The game has a bit of a tutorial, but for the most part seems to expect that you played the original, so you already know what's going on. I was a bit confused, but I definitely liked what I played. It may not be Meiji period Japan, which is my era of choice when it comes to Japanese history, but I still was in love with the visuals and the overall setting of the game. I know I'll be back to this one, but definitely after I get around to playing the first one, which is still sitting in my library. Next up is one of Rhode Island's more memorable, unmitigated economic disasters that cost taxpayers a lot of money, which is, of course, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. Or in this case, the remaster, so it's actually a re-reckoning that Rhode Islanders have nothing to do with this time around. Anyway, what is it? For those who aren't aware of the game to have played it back in its original form, it's a sprawling open-world fantasy adventure. Much of the writing comes from the mind of R.A. Salvatore himself, who is known for many Forgotten Realms novels. The world is bright and vibrant and has a stylized look that reminds me very much of some areas in World of Warcraft. Combat is a real-time action with a variety of toys for the players to use, whether big beefy weapons, faster and stealthier options, or going ranged with a bow or magic. Basically, it's fun. But it's just okay fun. I don't think there'll be much stand out here. At the end of the day, it's a good game, but it's nothing amazing in my opinion. I did play the original and I remember liking it, but I felt the amount of quests and content stuffed in the game reminded me of playing a MMO. Most of the quests were unremarkable and the content here felt like it was just for time filler. As a remaster, it's just an upscaling of the graphics and the inclusion of the DLC, so don't expect anything new if you've already exhausted this game's content, which, holy crap, kudos to you if you did. That doesn't mean I wasn't excited to get this game though. After the announcement of the remaster, I figured having this game would be a good excuse to dip my toes once more into the lands of Amalur. I'm just not sure if I'll be sticking around to the end. When I saw Hell Let Loose as one of the headliners for the bundle, I became immediately skeptical. In the past, Humble has put in multiplayer-only games that have usually been dead player populations even if the gameplay was good. Luckily, that's not the case with this game. So first and foremost, you can find games to play, and when I last checked, they had close to a 7,000 player count in a 24-hour period. And what is it? Well, as you could already see from the footage, it's a World War II shooter with a careful eye for detail. Although, I want to say that in my hour with the game, I was only able to play one match on the Foy map. Everything from the map to the vehicles to the sounds all helped create a really immersive experience. However, what I was really surprised with was the level of teamwork everyone seemed to pull off. I'm unsure if this is the norm or not, but shout out to my squad for being really helpful with calling out things and planning out our next objectives. But even on a larger scale, each side is led by a commander who calls the high strategic shots, and it seems to be a system that actually worked. Various squads would link up with one another to take points and move the front line. To anyone wanting something a bit more authentic from the Call of Duty and Battlefield franchises, then I think you'll find something here, although it's obviously a slower pacing than those aforementioned games. It's pretty intimidating for me, and I imagine there's a huge learning curve I probably don't have the time for. But I really was impressed with this game and plan to leave it installed to run a match every now and then in the very least. Okay, let's wrap this up and see if this bundle is worth it or not. I based my rating solely on whether I thought the game was worth playing on about an hour or so of hands-on gameplay. Overall, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, this month was another solid entry to 2022. I think I could understand why some might skip this one with no major standouts in the lineup, but I think they'd be missing out on some pretty good games. I always enjoy trying out a month of Humble Choice, but I felt that I genuinely had more fun than usual this time around. But let's see how the games all stack up in the recommendations. The must-plays of the month are Unmetal, Raji, an Ancient Epic, and Kingdoms of Amalur: Re-Reckoning. Unmetal is a fun stealth game that has a focus on pop culture references and humor for their storytelling tools. I know humor is completely subjective, but I think many will find a laugh or two from this game. Raji is a game that I would suggest playing just for its sheer different setting. I know not everyone cares about mythology, or even other cultures, although I feel you should in my honest opinion. But I really like the experience of something new and fresh, at least from my perspective. Finally, some of you may be surprised I placed Kingdoms of Amalur here after what I said in its section. And yes, I do believe this will be a good game at the end of the day that will probably be forgotten. But I also believe that if you're a fan of open world fantasy, then it's something that should at least be tried, as it definitely is one of the better ones. In my strong recommendations, I have Hell Let Loose, Shadow Tactics, Blade of the Shogun, Aiko's Choice, and Roboquest. Hell Let Loose is a great immersive World War II shooter that has a focus on authenticity, teamwork, and a bit of complexity. It's a slow burn at times and won't always have the high-octane intensity that some of the AAA shooters do, but it brings something special to the table. Aiko's Choice is a fun stealth tactics game with a rich setting and a cast of characters. The gameplay is something that people are either going to like or dislike if they're not into stealth tactics games, but if you do, then I'm sure this one will be worth playing. Roboquest was a fun FPS roguelite. It has some rough edges, but the combat is a ton of fun, making the idea of just one more run more than applicable here. My week recommendation for the month is Eldest Souls. There's nothing inherently bad about Eldest Souls. What I played was pretty fun, but also kind of frustrating. I think the boss rush mode feel of the game knocks this down for me, as I'm not a fan of constant pressure and difficulty. And in my Don't Bother With section is Morbid, the 7 Acolytes. Although, I'll be completely honest in saying that I'm not sure if it belongs here. Compared to Eldest Souls and Raji, I felt the combat was a lot weaker in Morbid. That might not be fair, and since I wasn't able to level up and take full advantage of what Morbid had to offer, it feels even less fair. So take this one with a grain of salt. I just feel that it didn't deliver for me, and I don't see myself playing it with so many other better games that did capture my attention. That wraps up my thoughts on this month's bundle. Another good month with one more to go for the year. Hopefully Humble ends the year with a bang. Do you agree with my thoughts? What games, if any, are you looking forward to playing? Let me know what your thoughts are if there are any different recommendations you'd make in the comments below. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.